Bob, it feels like you've been running for governor for a decade. Why now?
It's only been a year. It's only been a year. Hey, others put motivations on people. That's never been my thing. So, but obviously, once Governor Inslee decided not to seek a fourth term, it became clear to me if I was going to run for governor, obviously this was the time to think about it. So, yeah.
As I told you, we've got a whole campaign here on KOMO, 4 for 24.
Yeah.
There are 4 candidates that seem to be the big 4 when it comes to the governor's race. But for you personally, what are your 4 top priorities in 24?
Yeah, so number one, first thing I think we do as a state is change the whole state bureaucracy to make sure we're centering the people in the decisions we make and to solve our problems. So there's a zillion issues, right? But in no particular order, take public safety. The first plan we rolled out as a campaign, first detailed plan that any candidate put out was on public safety, focusing on things like I talked about in here to our supporters a little bit earlier, which is we rank last per capita, Washington State does, in number of law enforcement officers we have. Look, that's unacceptable. I've got a plan to address that. Look forward to seeing our other candidates, what their plans are on that. Number 2, homelessness, which gets into a whole range of complex issues, as you and your viewers know. You've got mental health issues, you've got chemical dependency issues, you've got affordability issues, all that come into that umbrella of homelessness. And so as a governor, working with local jurisdictions to make sure we're addressing that will be key. Affordability, again, I've been to all 39 counties. The issue I heard the most in all 39 counties is the cost of housing. Housing jurisdiction after jurisdiction. We need to be investing in more housing. We need to build 1 million new units of housing in the next 15 to 20 years. And as governor, I'll be very focused on that. So those combination of all those issues will be central to my time as governor. And one more I'll add is, I'm not sure if I'm number 4, if I'm on number 5, but one more I'll add is, I think as a state, we need to be prepared for the potential of a Donald Trump presidency. And we'll need to have a governor who stands up for the rights of all Washingtonians. I have done that, my opponents have not, and there's a clear contrast in this race on that issue.
So I heard homelessness, public safety, housing.
Fentanyl epidemic, mental health issues, all those combined together for multiple issues that our state is facing. And look, I always hesitate on, hey, when the top 3, top 2, top 4, because we haven't even talked about education. Look, I'm the son of, my mom's passed away not too long ago. She was a public school special education teacher. Look, the challenges we have with our education system generally, and some of those specific areas like special education are profound. The number of kids in our state with special needs, the kind of kids my mom was working with year after year after year and talking about over the dinner table with me and my siblings, those challenges are significant. The actual physical structure for school. And I was in Republic, Washington, so I toured all 39 counties. What the folks in Republic wanted to talk about was the lack of the structures, the actual infrastructure for their schools and how they need new buildings for the kids in their jurisdiction. So there are multiple challenges we have as a state. But I think what we need as a governor is a change agent, someone who's demonstrating an ability to go in and shake things up. I've certainly done that when I ran for the King County Council, certainly done that as an Attorney General, and I don't plan on changing that.
Okay, so there might be a change agent needed when it comes to homelessness. Washington State, as you know, HUD in their latest point in time count says Washington State has the 4th most people living unsheltered, homeless people of any state in the nation. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of issues with state right-of-ways. The state has made some progress there, but it's still a problem. These are areas where there's a lot of encampments, a lot of crime that's been associated with them. So what's the big idea? How do you fix homelessness?
When I talk to folks all across the state is, as Attorney General, I could see a problem. I could file a lawsuit and often get a decision from a judge in a matter of weeks that stopped that problem, right? I'm aware that being governor is a different kind of job. Issues like homelessness, the fentanyl epidemic, right? Public safety. These are challenging issues. You're not going to solve them overnight. But I think what we need is a change in approach from the state perspective. Someone who comes in as a change agent and is willing to focus on these issues. So when it comes to homelessness, look, when I was on King County Council, I spent a night at an emergency shelter. Went in, spent the night there to get a feel for what's going on at the ground level. The people who provide those services, the folks who are staying in those emergency services, utilizing those emergency services. As a governor, we need to make sure we're working to addressing the underlying causes of homelessness. Look, Dave Reichert, he has said he would take the unhoused and send them to McNeil Island. That's where we keep our sexually violent predators. I know that because my team sends those folks there. I'm sorry, that is not a serious solution to an issue as serious as homelessness. What we need is our investments that are smart, that get folks in temporary housing, get them off the streets, get them the wraparound services that they need to address the underlying issues that are creating the situation in which they're homeless. We've talked about those: mental health, chemical dependency, housing affordability. The good news is, as Attorney General, I've addressed those. My team's brought in more than $1 billion from the opioid epidemic, taking on the largest corporations in the world. I'm insisting that every one of those dollars be used in jurisdictions all around the state for more treatment, for more first responders to help. That's what we need, smart investments to help folks who are on the streets, not send them to McNeil Island like Dave Reichert wants to do.
What's the barometer of success then? If you're talking about spending more money on treatment and spending more money on homelessness and spending more money on public safety, I mean, what would a Ferguson administration barometer of success be in that first year?
Making progress on all those issues, reducing the number of individuals who are homeless in our state, making our communities more safe, hiring more law enforcement officers. Again, my plan is clear. Put $100 million into my first budget so local jurisdictions can use those resources as hiring bonuses for law enforcement officers or for increased salaries. Dave Reichert opposes that for reasons I don't understand. I think we need more resources to hire more law enforcement officers all across our state. So each issue is a little bit different, I think, Chris, in how you measure that. When it comes to number of law enforcement officers, that is a number, right? You can quantify that all across the state. So I'll be focused on that. When it comes to our ferry service, we're operating at 50% capacity on our ferry service. Look, I talk about ferry service, you heard it in there. Doesn't matter if I'm in Seattle, I talked about Tacoma yesterday. Look, we are failing folks in island communities when it comes to our ferry service. We need to center those people in the decisions we make and treat it like the crisis it is. So progress there is increasing the number of routes, increasing the number of ferries. So in each of these issues, look, in my 20 years in politics, I don't think anyone's ever said that I'm not someone who goes in trying to change things. That's been my approach from day one on the King County Council and day one as Attorney General. I'm not a big fan of the status quo, and we have real challenges as a state. I plan on leaning into those challenges.
So you know this, that Mark Mullet and others have pointed out, independents and Republicans in particular, that you wanted to decriminalize drugs in 2021, that you wanted to eliminate the criminal penalties for non-commercial possession. Oregon did it.
Yep.
It was chaotic.
Yep.
Do you still believe that Washington should do it?
Oh no, look, I long ago said that should not be our approach. And you're right, Oregon passed it like with 55 or 56% of the vote, and there are lessons to be learned from that, right? It seemed to the folks of Oregon that was a good idea. Clearly did not work. And I'm proud that, hey, to be clear, I've always supported criminal penalties for dealers. Always support going after companies that fuel our opioid epidemic. We talked about that earlier. Making sure that folks aren't using open use of drugs on our streets. And I'm proud that the money we brought in from those cases for treatment were critical in the legislature recently passing legislation that criminalized that conduct. And many legislators said, hey, we want to see the treatment as well, right? We're not going to prosecute our way out of this. We need to have treatment for folks as well. And that $1.3 billion that my team has brought to the state is going to play a huge role in making sure we address that in the right way. This is a public health issue as well, right? Folks need to be held accountable for their actions, but we also got to get folks to treatment. Otherwise, we're simply recycling folks to the system.
So you do not want to decriminalize drugs anymore?
I support the legislature's actions long ago to take that action. That's been public, that's been out there for a long time. I get that. One of my opponents who's polling at 4% wants to relitigate things in the past. Mark needs to be accountable for his vote to limit police pursuits. I think that was a bad idea. He took a bad vote on that. Mark took a bad vote on a bill I proposed for women's reproductive rights, which was if you're a woman in Washington state, before this law I proposed passed, let's say you use an app to track your period, very common nowadays. Well, unfortunately, the law used to be that whoever had that app could sell that information. Sell it to somebody or to a prosecutor in another state, for example. Well, that really endangers women of Washington state. I proposed a law that said, no, that information is private. Just like if you go to a doctor, they can't sell off that information. Only one Democrat in the entire legislature voted against that piece of legislation. That was Mark Mullet. So I think Mark needs to worry about his own votes on issues of reproductive freedom, on privacy, and on police pursuits.
You've been quiet on some of these initiatives, 3 of which were settled by the legislature, including the police pursuit law.
I'm opposed to all I'm not sure what you were listening to. I've been clear on those 3 issues for a long time. Talking to reporters, talking at events, I've been very clear. All 3 of those, yeah. So no, I just want to be clear. Not been silent at all. Been very clear about that.
So when Mullet and others accuse you of being soft on crime, are you soft on crime?
I mean, look, just to be clear, I understand. Mark's polling at literally 4%. I mean, he's got $12,000 to spend on the primary. I'm not worried about Mark Mullet. I'm focused on Dave Reichert. But I look forward to a public safety conversation with Dave Reichert. I'm proud of my record as an Attorney General. We have a criminal division. We handle the sexually violent predator cases for 38 out of 39 counties. Some county handles them on their own. Every other prosecutor in Washington State, Democrat and Republican, on the most serious offenders we have as a state, entrust my team and me to handle those cases in 38 out of 39 counties. We handle the most serious offenses in jurisdictions all across the state. Again, prosecutors of both political parties ask my team to take on the jurisdiction of those cases because they know we'll handle those cases in a way that stands up for victims and stands up for accountability. And I'm looking forward to a conversation with Dave Reichert about public safety. We're proud of our record on that and look forward to a debate about that.
Also a conversation about public safety. I brought this up to you last week. You're a distinguished alumni at the University of Washington. There has been an encampment there that people have been worried about. There were some of those same protesters likely involved in shutting down I-5 as well. And this is something that people across the political spectrum have been upset about.
Agreed.
The idea that the freeway was blocked for several hours.
Agreed.
The encampment has been set up for several weeks. If you're governor, when do you get involved in that?
Well, let's take the freeway, for example. We're recall seeing a photograph of that protest where there was an emergency vehicle that was stopped in its tracks because of the protest. So as a governor, you're involved immediately on something like that. Utilizing the powers you have with state troopers as appropriate, to utilize that resource to make sure that that's being cleared so folks can use their freeways or access SeaTac Airport. Or obviously on a campus, all students should, as we've talked about before, be able to navigate their way to their classes unimpeded and not being harassed. And so as a governor, all those issues are ones that are the type of crisis that comes up where a governor is going to be called upon to act immediately, right? And to be engaged immediately. And I look forward as governor to handling exactly that way.
Should the UW have jumped in earlier to avoid some of the graffiti and the damage to the buildings before it went too far? Would you have encouraged the University of Washington president to do something earlier than she did?
I mean, President Kelsey had a tough situation on her hands. Let's be clear about that. And to her credit, from the last news reports I've seen, they've worked out an understanding with the students to clear the encampment and to bring back things to a sense of normalcy on the campus. And I think it's easy to second guess somebody who's facing a very, very challenging situation. But I think, she deserves some credit for handling that difficult situation in a way that looks like it's going to reach a peaceful outcome. With the vandalism to the hub, or I was a student, and to buildings, that's unacceptable. And I think it's appropriate now that that's been cleared. It's time.
What do you think about that agreement that's been worked out between the protesters and the university?
I've not seen the details. I saw the headline, saw an article. It sounds like there's an agreement where the camp's going to be cleared, and the university is going to work with the students on some issues that the students have obvious concerns about. So again, I've not gone into the details of that, but I am glad that it's being resolved in a way that has largely been peaceful. But that said, I'm speaking to a supporter here who's deeply concerned about the anti-Semitism, for example. That's been clearly evidenced at campuses all across this country. One thing I've talked about is, my public safety plan, I talk about a hate crimes team. We're forming one in our office, but to expand that. Dave Reichert doesn't have that in his plan. What's up with that? Should ask him that. It was easy to put a tweet out there. Well, let's actually address this, right? If folks are engaging in that kind of hate speech that is criminal, we need resources to do it. I've leaned into that. Working with the legislature, putting a unit together, let's prosecute those cases, let's hold people accountable. That's how you prevent that going forward, is when people realize there's accountability. Local prosecutors have challenges. They got a lot of cases on their plate, right? Having a unit like that in the AG's office will go a long way to addressing that kind of hate speech that has no place in Washington State.
So a couple of the plans you've already put on your website, $100 million in grants for additional troopers and local law enforcement agencies. How is that supposed to work? I mean, we've seen the shortage across the country of people who actually want to be in law enforcement. We've seen a shortage in the State Patrol, a shortage in the Seattle Police Department in particular. So how is this supposed to change the course of staffing in these departments?
Well, it will change by adding additional resources to salary and signing bonuses to attract individuals to come to Washington State or to pursue going into law enforcement, because they realize, hey, there's additional salary, there's more resources for that. That helps me afford a house, that helps me afford my groceries, right? I think that is natural. Why Dave Reichert exposed that, you'd have to ask him, but we've seen other governors across the state take precisely that step, Democrats and Republicans, that makes sense to me. We think as a state, we want to make sure we are providing a fair wage and a good wage for folks who do the most important work, educators, law enforcement. And I think when you have a crisis, as we do, with the lack of law enforcement officers, that seems to me the type of issue you lean into as a governor and lean into with your budget to do what you can. I'm open to additional ideas as well, but what I've seen from Dave Reichert and law enforcement officers should know this, he's opposed to it. I think they deserve a greater salary. I think there should be signing bonuses. I think more resources should be available to local jurisdictions that often don't have much of a budget, right, to expand on that and to attract those law enforcement officers. So to me, it's a good idea, and I plan on proposing in my first budget.
And you've got ferries front and center on your website right now. Why is it that so many elected officials say, oh, this will be fixed in a few years? One, why are they saying that? And two, can you fix it faster? If this plan that you've laid out on your website, how is that supposed to fix anything, say, in a year or 2 years versus several years down the road?
I want to be clear. I'm not sure who's saying it can be fixed in a couple of years.
I'm saying people would like it fixed in a couple of years versus what I hear from senators, state senators is, hey, we're 3-4 years down the road before we're going to be able to get all these boats up and into service. Can it be done faster? Can your plan do it faster?
Yeah, what I would say is, number one, the next governor needs to treat the ferry situation like the crisis that it is. That's number one. Number two, there's a reason why that was one of my first plans I rolled out, was because what I've heard very clearly from folks in island communities about their frustration. Small business owners, high school students, folks trying to get to a doctor's appointment. Number three, as a governor, one thing I've learned as Attorney General is we have thousands of cases going on at any one time. I can't be aware of every case, obviously. But I need to make sure I've got folks reporting to me on the most important cases. And they know they're the most important cases, where I need daily updates on what's going on. Look, as a governor, I've proposed for ferry service, the person who heads up ferries is going to be sitting on my cabinet meetings. And they're reporting directly to me, just like we're having this conversation about the progress we're making. And I think we can move faster to address this. As one example, up in the San Juan Islands, for example, there is proposal from local elected officials, business folks, community leaders, on one element of this challenge, which is inadequate staffing. But they talk about showing up for a ferry. A ferry is there, but there's not enough people to operate the ferry. Well, that's gotta be pretty dang frustrating, right? I think most people can realize, wait a second, constructing a ferry might take some time, okay? And we got a crisis, that might take a little time. But when you actually have a ferry, without the people to run it, that's frustrating. And there are steps the state can take that are outlined in my plan, right? To put more resource into getting folks hired to actually work those ferries and get them running when they're available. So I think there are steps that we can take specifically to shorten that timeline. What I want folks in island communities to know, and that I've been talking about, is it's a top priority where that person's going to be in my cabinet meetings reporting directly to me, because to me it's a crisis and we need to be acting every single day to move forward on.
There are people to this day who say part of the problem with law enforcement, part of the problem with the ferry system was because there was the vaccine mandate that I know you were supportive of at the time, but with the benefit of hindsight, should there have been a different decision there on the vaccine mandates?
Because other folks can look backwards. That's not my approach. Our crises are too many. What I would say for me as a statewide elected official, I was the one statewide official that worked with our employees who are represented and bargained how we're going to handle the epidemic. I think that's the appropriate way that I thought for my office to work with the employees and figure out how we're going to manage this crisis. And so I'm not looking back on, right? That's we got too many challenges moving forward to be looking back.
On the Carbon Commitment Act, the biggest complaint has been the price of gas.
Absolutely.
And I've heard Mark Mullet say, hey, we need to tweak it.
Yes.
I've heard others say repeal the whole thing.
Yes.
Where do you stand on that if once we get past November and if you're elected governor?
Yeah. So I've been clear on this. It needs to be adjusted. You heard me in there talking about the issue of affordability. I heard all across the state around housing and on gas prices. And folks are feeling that. And so the good news is with the Climate Commitment Act, it makes significant contributions to a working family's tax credit. We should expand the investment of the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars the Climate Commitment Act brings in to increase the amount of funding we have for that working family's tax credit, which, to your point, addresses folks who are hardest hit by those gas prices. That, to me, is an example of a change that needs to be made. So I don't think we should throw the baby out the bathwater on these issues. Right? These investments are going to make a huge difference for jobs all across our state, addressing climate all across our state. That's important. I don't think we should go backwards. But it's not unusual for any law that the legislature adopts, as you know. It's not perfect the first time it comes out, right? They're trying to put a lot together. So I think vigilance on tweaking that, changing that, to make sure we're addressing that very fundamental issue of those gas prices for the folks who can least afford an increase to the pump. That makes sense to me.
So if it stays in place and goes to, continues on,
Yeah.
your governor, you'd be open to tweaking it.
I've been clear about that from day one. I want to say not open to it, like we need to tweak it,
Yeah.
right? Increase that investment on the working families tax credit. I want to be very clear, that's been my position from day one. So yes, I'll be opposed to the initiative, want to be clear, but yes, it needs to be improved.
So you say you're a change agent, you said it multiple times. There are people who will argue that it's a continuation of the Inslee administration if
Yeah.
you're elected. So how do you convince people you're just not the status quo guy?
Yeah, I think all folks have to do is look at my record, right? When I first ran for the King County Council in this neighborhood, I ran against a 20-year incumbent who was a Democrat like me, who was chair of the King County Council. You can't take on the establishment any more than that in what happens to be a deeply Democratic part of our state. Took on that race, and I won that race. I supported as a King County Council member reducing the size of the King County Council from 13 down to 9. The only Democrat who supported that, I thought that was common sense from a budget standpoint, delivered on that. My reward was my 4-year term, which cut short to 2 years, and I lost my district and had to run again against another Democrat. I won again. So from day one of my time in politics, I've been willing to do that. As an Attorney General, first lawsuit I filed against the president was not Donald Trump, it was Barack Obama. It was on behalf of workers in Central Washington, and we won that case. So I've not been shy on taking on my party here locally. I've not been shy about taking on presidents of my own party on high-profile cases, and I don't plan on changing. That's the way I've always been in my politics. I'm proud that I'm the only candidate that does not take money from large corporations or corporate PACs. It's a people-powered campaign. You saw more than a couple hundred people in there right now, right? That's what the campaign's about. All of my opponents take that money, right? I'm focused on the people. That's the way I've always been in my politics. And as a governor, that's the kind of administration people can see. So I don't worry about comparisons. We're all different people. You're different than reporters on different news stations, right? You're not the same. You're in the same industry, but you're different. And I think people understand that I'm different than Chris Gregoire, or different than Jay Inslee, or different than Gary Locke. We're different people. But the key thing is, I do think we have values as a state. Dave Reichert's anti-choice. I do not think that's going to play well with the overwhelming majority of Washingtonians. He opposes marriage equality. I think that's out of step with the majority of Washingtonians. He voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act 37 times, out of touch. He voted with the Trump agenda 93% of the time, out of touch. So the contrast with myself and Dave Reichert, and that's where this campaign's going, by the way, me versus Dave Reichert in November, the choice will be very, very clear to someone who is wildly out of touch from the mainstream of Washington voters, and someone who's in touch with that mainstream and willing to engage in the kind of change that we need as a state.
And you're the only Bob Ferguson now running.
I was waiting for that. We can laugh about it now. So a happy ending in the end, but yes, I'm the only Bob Ferguson still running.
Thanks.
Hey, appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for the time.